This is the first panel, and I suppose I've been chosen to chair it because I'm the elected president of about 20,000 writers in 104 countries organized into 144 Penn centers. And so, in a way, myself and a whole bunch of us go to bed and wake up in the morning hearing about and trying to do something about freedom of expression on the positive side and censorship on the negative side. You're going to hear from four people with very different experiences. Mona El-Tohawi, who's Egyptian journalist, expert on Arab-Muslim issues. Jacob Mishangama, who's a human rights lawyer and is very interested in, I think you'd say, in the purity and the proper purity of freedom of expression. Fernando Lara Mesquita, who's involved with, his family has been involved with the oldest continuous newspaper in Brazil, and therefore a long experience with jail, banning, shutting down, all the rest of it. And Gregory Shvedov, who from Moscow runs an online web journal, The Caucasian Knot, which supports independent media, and of course a lot of his journalists are constantly under threat, and many of them some of them have been killed. So just a few thoughts on top of that. You know, I think one of the big problems is that virtually all of our civilizations begin from an anti-freedom of expression point of view, a pro-censorship point of view. After all, the Abrahamic tradition, three of the big religions, begins with a clarion call for society-wide self-censorship. After all, what happens? A snake, the devil, i.e. the intellectual writer, tricks the naive and ignorant citizen into giving up their innocence and naivete in order to become conscious communicators. And it's presented as a very ugly story. And we're still dealing with that, the outcomes of that fundamental assumption within our society today. We've had breakthroughs at all sorts of times through our history. My favorite is 1755, not what actually happens first, which is the Lisbon earthquake. Thousands of essentially poor people, children, women die. The Catholic Church, through the Jesuits, announces that this is because they have sinned, and therefore God is judging them, Sodom and Gomorrah. And at that point, Voltaire writes a pretty good poem called On the Lisbon Earthquake, which in about 1.5 minutes of reading decimates, through language, through freedom of expression, through argument, decimates the established church intellectually and emotionally, and decimates, therefore, the aristocracy and the kings who are reliant on it. And that breakthrough of freedom of expression is really the beginning of what produces the next 300-400 years. But in spite of that bad start and those interesting breakthroughs, it just goes on. And I'm frankly constantly surprised by the persistence of, for example, the old brutal methods of censorship, the mediocre thugs. There's still so many of them. You heard about Belarus today. Ben Ali was obviously one in Tunisia. He's gone for the right reasons. And then you have the more sophisticated who have a side of thuggery, Mubarak, but also a very sophisticated side in a very complex society. And I just recommend you go and read a great masterpiece by Gamal al-Gitani, a novel called Zaini Barakat, which takes place in the last 10 years of the Mamluks in Cairo and the first 10 years of the Ottomans. And one of the two heroes, it's the governor of Cairo and the head of security. And the head of security says at one point, the policeman's task is to administer justice among the people, but he does not do it in a manner acceptable to the people. And that's a good thing, according to the chief of security. In spite of that kind of sophistication, what we saw was that through high technology and on-the-ground commitment, there was an amazing breakthrough in things happening. Yet already, bloggers are being put in prison and condemned by military courts to jail. So in a way, they're already the old power, the old systems are clawing back their control and their limitations on freedom of expression. More sophisticated in a way. You take a case like China, Liu Xiaobo, and so on. And But the most important thing is not the putting people in prison. That's not really the methodology or the ruining of their lives. The methodology is to convince the world that really it's too bad, but on the other hand, it's more important to do away with poverty and to have economic growth. And then later on, one can think about limiting censorship and having more free expression. So you have old-fashioned violence, sophisticated misrepresentation, and of course, enormous campaigns to block high technology communications. In a way, even more sophisticated, Mexico, the place where there are the most deaths per year of writers in the world today, sometimes competing with Pakistan. And there you have a blend of censorship through the old brutality, the thuggery, through limited ownership of means of communication. But above all, you have censorship through the existence of highly sophisticated elite, which looks and is graduates, PhDs from Harvard, smooth-talking, beautifully dressed, reassuring, well-intentioned, telling everybody that this is just a civil war between the people and the drug warlords, whereas in fact, of course, it's the outcome of 50 years of incredible corruption in which there is no line between various levels of government, police, and army and the drug warlords. And I'm going to give you one example of the sophistication. In order to prove that they're of goodwill, the elite created, through the president, a state prosecutor's office for the attention to crimes committed against freedom of expression. Doesn't that sound wonderful? And a very good person. The only trouble is they didn't give him any power to investigate crimes, lay charges, or tackle organized crime cases. You know, so it's that sort of approach. Censorship through chill, well, that's another sophisticated approach, except it's very direct. You just murder somebody like Giuliano Merikamis, who's working with Palestinians as an Israeli to try and bring them together, or to try and frighten people. Simply, University of Mumbai recently, right-wing populist party, frightened the university into banning books because the people in the university weren't used to that level of threat. The rise of populism, another form of censorship. And then finally, just let me say this. Writers are used to being in the front line. You heard about that this morning. Writers, politicians, public figures, intellectuals. But a lot of the power today lies in the administrative class. And the administrative class, the managers, are used to being in the second line. And they make many of the major decisions on freedom of expression or censorship. And frankly, they're just not used to it. And they cave really fast. So if we're going to go on having important power in the hands of managers, we have to radically change the way managers are formed and what they expect from their positions. And now we'll move on to our speakers. Well, that I thought was a really fascinating beginning. I think it would be kind of nice to just begin where we ended, with hearing what you think about Jacob's thoughts on basically Europe and I suppose North America, the Western democracies' attitudes toward hate laws. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to hear what from a Brazilian, from an Egyptian, from a Russian point of view.
I think Jacob makes great points, and I say that as an American Muslim. I'm recently naturalized.
Oh, all right.
And yeah, and last year I think this point really came to the fore for me when I was demonstrating outside of Park 51, the Islamic Community Center in New York, that's 2 blocks away from Ground Zero, and people there who opposed building this Islamic Community Center were saying, you know, you're offending us. And I'm a huge fan of offense, because offense goes both ways. I'm not suggesting the people who wanted to build that Islamic Community Center want to build it to offend anyone, because Muslims as well as non-Muslims died on 9/11, and we're not responsible for what happened on 9/11. But at the same time, I also defend Terry Jones's right to burn the Quran. You know, go ahead, because the First Amendment guarantees both the right of freedom of religion, basically, and freedom of expression. So I totally agree with you, as a Muslim, as an American, and as an Egyptian.
Well, I think much what we hear today here is it's about education. No? It's the homogeneity of the education of some populations against. We saw people here who can see things that their people doesn't see, and the frustration they feel with that. Journalists that publish the truth about what the king is doing, and the people continues like that. Now, this is all about education. So I think the United States, you can see this evolution because you have a more homogeneous level of education for the whole population. So things go faster there. Being countries like Brazil it's a kind of being like in a Babel, because you say things and people cannot reach it because they are almost illiterate. The main instrument of control of the politics in Brazil is television. 1/4 of the televisions in Brazil are owned by the politicians. So, you cannot in the television 2 months before elections, you cannot be critic about the politicians. You must give them space for them to make their campaign publicity. So that's how things go. You know, everybody here sees the same thing, but our publics, they see different things, and they are allowed to see the level of the education. Let them see part of it and not all of it. You know.
Well, I just believe that when I'm talking about West, United States, Europe, it's very much a case of talking about the governments, but it's a strong thing to try to attract not only the officials, the government officials, but those who are active in society, those who protest and those who don't, those who really want to tell something, but maybe they don't know how. Maybe they think it's not their case. Maybe why should I react on what's going on in Egypt or in the Caucasus, living somewhere in Ohio, living somewhere in California, or living somewhere in other places in different European countries. That's what I believe is the role of human rights defenders nowadays, to say, yes, it's your case, whatever place you live, whatever is your profession. You don't have to be the congressman. You don't have to be the State Department employee. You don't have to be the person who works in Brussels and looking forward to Eurasia cooperation, different institutions. You are a human being, and you think it is not appropriate to behave like that with women in Chechnya. And that's why you would watch this video, and that's why you would comment down there, and that's how you spend your time, just a little bit of it.
So why do you think, or any of you think, if this is the case, that in a way, in spite of these amazing systems of communication, that people actually seem to be having so much trouble doing that basic philosophical thing, which is imagining the other and engaging in some way about it? I mean, amazing things have happened in Egypt and Tunisia, but actually around the world, one can't say that, apart from watching, Al Jazeera, one can't say that much was done by people elsewhere. So why are people not able to somehow use this communications to engage?
I think people are starting using it more and more, and we do observe it, and that's how people get help. Then there is enough of attention, not only from traditional media, not only from politicians. That helps, because when there is this particular person who is suffering, and you can watch it, and you can comment on that, that helps this particular person.
Do any of you think there's more engagement on, quote-unquote, physically far away issues?
Speaking from a European perspective, I think when it comes to the Arab revolutions, I think there has been sort of for the first, there's been an almost criminal neglect on the part of Western governments because they have been basically propping up those dictators who are now falling. And actually in October, Mona and I was at a conference in Copenhagen about freedom of expression in the Middle East, and it was very fascinating to see some of the people who have been active on the ground saying this out loud in Denmark, saying that why are you supporting this? So those people who are keeping us down, and now they've managed to do so without the help of the West. But there's also been a lot of cynicism, I think. I think a lot of people in the West had given up the idea that people in the Middle East and North Africa were interested in freedom, that they were simply, their culture, perhaps their religion, simply made them not interested in freedom, and that is part of the explanation probably. What we see now has energized some people, but it might have been too little, too late. We'll see how people start to react.
But I mean, it maybe goes back to the education question. But for 2 decades, not very smart dictators were able to get away with making the argument to sophisticated, quote-unquote, Europeans and Americans that they had to be allowed to stay in power because they were the bulwark against extremism, when any intellectual knows that they're actually the cause of extremism. So, I mean, how does, when you think of the number of NGOs and the number of, how are we never able to make the ridiculousness of that argument stick inside the democracies?
Well, because it served the interests of all those Western allies of those dictators to continue believing their lies. This is what WikiLeaks did. I mean, if anything, WikiLeaks should create a revolution in DC. WikiLeaks should create a revolution in the European Union, but especially DC, because what WikiLeaks shows you is that the US State Department did not buy those lies. They knew what was happening. The US State Department knew in that it spoke to a whole list of activists on the ground in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, in so many other countries that clearly told them, we want to take part in freeing our countries, and these are the obstacles in our ways, and we need a greater political arena through which to work. And they would send those cables back to DC, and everybody knew, and yet the official statement is, the Hosni Mubarak regime is a stable regime that is interested in reform. Just a few days ago, the State Department, Hillary Clinton, continued to say that Bashar al-Assad is a reformer. How?
But that absolutely true. But that's not my question. My question is, why were we, I mean, we might as well take some blame, in the old Abrahamic tradition, why were we unable to make it clear to the citizenry that this was nonsense?
Who's we?
Well, writers, activists, journalists.
Well,
Why were we unable to break through the nonsense?
But which public bought the nonsense? Which public?
Well, the nonsense of this false argument.
Yeah, but the public in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt didn't buy it, so you're talking about the Western
I'm talking
public.
about the West.
Okay.
I think some are trying, and I think there are different projects which are about these particular issues, and they need more support, they need more coverage, they need to be seen. Look how many of the new media initiatives are developed now in the United States, particular to investigate, particular to dig into these kind of issues.
Well, but not everybody lives on this kind of agenda. There are many agendas, and the stronger ones, the economic agendas, and so. So you were speaking about the support that some governments give to those thugs everywhere in the world. Well, it's not their problem. There are guys who are in those governments whose task is to continue to sell and buy and make his country go round, and he has to deal with who is there at the moment. So the task of fighting those people is ours. This is our role. Okay, people who write, people who's in the press, and then again you will fall on the problem of education. So why I think this is important for you to see, if you understand that education is a fundamental issue in this fight, because no matter if some thousand of Egyptians can see this, because they were educated in a special manner compared to the median of the country, you will never arrive on that. You must first bring all the country's education up. Democracy is a byproduct of education. It's not something that a media guy can do or anybody can do. A good tyrant can do. Now, democracy is a byproduct of education. There is no case of democracy that has followed an educational revolution. The
Should
first
just-
of which was Protestantism.
One should just add before you go which is the 19th century democratic movement in the West, was entirely in link with the education movement. It was precisely the same politicians who were fighting for public education. They were like that.
Yes.
And yet nobody today, this is not at the forefront. This is great because you're saying this, because it's not at the forefront of the public debate about censorship and freedom of
So, but
expression. Anyway.
this puts, for the media people, a focus. No, we must fight for education, and not just say, "Oh, you are a tyrant, and I am a good guy." You know.
I think you know there's some blame to be given to governments and civil society in the West, but I also think it's quite disappointing to see the role of some of the non-Western states who you would have thought would support freedom. For instance, South Africa. The role of South Africa in the international community is extremely disappointing. We see now with the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, some of the nations who are part of the Human Rights Council and who are supported by Brazil, by India, South Africa, countries that really could play a positive role for the democratization of non-democratic countries. But very often they side with tyrants, and I think that's also a big problem. And I think that they're showing solidarity with the wrong people, and I think it's for a country like South Africa to do so after what they went through is bitterly disappointing.
It's more than disappointing. The Burma speech today was very emphatic on that. This is also a part that we can do. Is to promote human rights as an obligation in the international relations. Now, this is another efficient tool. I think what we can do better to help the world getting better is promoting the good experiences and creating some rules of relationship, that oblige the others to think in some issues they don't want to think. This is a way. Carter done that, make that an official politics, but this can be efficient if everybody goes together, because if money passes through, you get what you have today with China.
Yeah, can I just make one more try on education? Virtually every country that has some money is today cutting back on money for education at exactly the same time that you're having what's been described this morning, which is a rise of populism, which is, of course, based on less education. And yet, education is not at the center of what we're all doing for freedom of expression and against censorship.
I think education is important, but I think sometimes it's an easy route to follow and just say we need education. There's a lot more than just education, and a great example of that is the Gulf region. The countries, very affluent countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, all of these countries spend millions of dollars on education and their people are very literate. Saudi Arabia, the majority of university students in Saudi Arabia are women. But when they graduate, what kind of culture are they graduating into? It's a culture that, yes, values education, but doesn't value equal rights between women and men, doesn't value equal rights between Sunnis and Shia, and the same for the rest of the region. So I think education is great, it's a worthy goal, but it's the entire system, the legal system, the cultural system. And I think I'd like to go back very quickly to a point that Jacob made. I think one of the reasons that many have been silent across the world is, and I hope that we end up killing this once and for all, the cultural relativism and the stereotypes of people around the world, so that people did used to think that, we in the Middle East and North Africa love our dictators. Egyptians love their pharaoh. The Saudis love this, the Bahrainis love that. No, we love freedom and dignity just like everybody else does. So, and you're all very educated. We're all very educated in the West. But why hold these incredibly culturally relativistic views of people anywhere else? Why think that someone in Egypt would not want the same rights that you do? So, education is great, but I think education is this very safe and easy thing. We say, oh, we should all just support education. There's a whole lot of other things too.
I just want to touch base on this value point of this issue. I believe that why social networks, new media sometimes works and sometimes not. Because there is a different values, and people share the value of having the moral obligation or commitment or responsibility to what's going on outside of their region. That's one thing, and that's how you get the whole campaigning somewhere, I don't know, somewhere in Norway where right now there are these great young people who are doing their school thing, targeting the people who live in somewhere in South America. Collecting money, collecting working hours, being devoted to the issues which are outside. This idea of values, the joint values of people who really care about what's going on outside, that's, I believe, not an issue only for the government, not only for the bureaucracy. That's an issue of common value. It might come through education, it might come from broader issue of traditions, of culture, but that's the key thing for human rights. Because if human rights are only for human rights fighters and for people who are responsible in state, that's one thing. If human rights are broadening through the new media and many other tools, that's a totally different result we can achieve in next 10 years from now.
And I guess you'd say it is actually amazing that the big breakthroughs in Tunisia, Egypt, and attempts elsewhere have been masses of people in the street, which is not about education.
Exactly, because we have literacy rates in Egypt are not 100%. The uneducated were in the street alongside the educated in Egypt because everyone wants freedom and dignity.
Well, you arrive at that point, but I'm not saying you must do nothing but education, but you must do everything and education, and mostly education, because what stays is education. That's my personal story, because I saw my family running to extinguish fires. I did it myself, and this is okay because you must make whatever you can for things not to go backwards to a point of no return. But what really counted in Brazil, in our effort, of 136 years of effort, we had always a first-line preoccupation with education. We created a university there that formed the people who, one generation later, really changed the degree of democracy in Brazil. The stablest things you conquer with education. The other ways of acting are ways of fight, or facing an aggression of doing what your human dignity do not admit you not to do. But what stays, what really results, is education. I don't know no story of any democracy today. You think on Asians, you think on Europe, on America, on US, all these stories are strictly related to educational revolutions, changes in the system of education. Education for liberty.
We'll go to the public. I can ask a stupid question, which leads us nowhere. but it was raised, and so I think it's, you know, here's this technology, it's clearly playing a role. On the other hand, governments are responding to the technology with an absolutely astonishing speed. I mean, the Chinese are shutting stuff down. You've heard a couple of stories already about that. I mean,
the worst part will be when they start to use technology.
well, they're already doing that. Well, they're already
This
doing it.
will
I mean,
be
the
the worst
governments
part.
and the governments, and everybody always says governments, large corporations, are moving as fast, as not, if not faster, I would think, than the people who are trying to do good with the technology. So this is one of those stupid speculation questions. I mean, what does this mean? Where does it lead? What does it look like in 10 years?
But that's,
Told you it was stupid. But I mean,
it's not a stupid question. It's a question of who is using. That's why the issue is not about technologies. It's not about technologies itself. It's about people who share these values. Yeah. Then you have a corporation of a whole bloody law enforcement agency which deals with the human rights defenders in this region. That's one thing. And then you have these agencies and a lot of people, not only human rights defenders, people from outside of the region, people, average people inside of the region. That's the whole different thing. We would see, I'm sure, the China example would really change, because I'm sure they're hiring more and more people to read and blog, But more people are joining the other side. And
it's like a race.
Yeah, and this way is no way for the corporation and agencies would be the strongest one, because many people in the society who take stand, who really think it's their case, they would defeat those who are these new censors, the censors of new times.
Mubarak shut down the internet for, 3 or 4 days in Egypt, for several days in Egypt, and if anything, it fueled the revolution, because all the kids who were on Facebook and Twitter had nothing to do, so they went down onto the streets, and all the parents who were worried about their children who, you know, text me and all that, and he shut down mobile phone lines, and they went down to see how their kids were doing and joined the revolution. So it was one of the stupidest things that he could have done, alongside sending camels and reinforcing stupid Orientalist stereotypes. But, you know, it is a cat and mouse game that I truly believe the people will win, because it is just one of many tools. And to think of it as just, it's what's happening online. What's happening online has to find a resonance, a reflection, feet on the ground in the real world for it to continue. So it's just one of many tools, and you have to bounce back and forth between the real and the virtual world.
It's true that in the midst of them turning it off and turning it on in the cell phones, that I was desperately trying to get a hold of the president of our Penn Center. We were worried about them, what was going on. Eventually, I had all these numbers, and I kept dialing and dialing for a day. And then suddenly, the number answered, and there's this screaming in the background. I said, Iqbal, what's going on? She said, I'm on the square. I said, are you all right? She said, yes, I'm just giving a speech in a minute. I said, well, you're taking care. She said, no, they're throwing rocks on the other side of the square. I'm okay, you know. And it was a wonderful kind of moment of the reality and also of the communications.
Yeah.
And solidarity.
Yeah, well, I felt a lot better once I got a hold of her, because we were all getting pretty worried, you know. Yeah. We just didn't know.
Well, I met an Egyptian a few days ago who was in Egypt during the revolution, and he said when they shut down mobile phones, excuse me, and they had to set up neighborhood watch committees, because Mubarak pulled off the police and opened the jails, and you had all these convicts running around terrorizing neighborhoods. So this Egyptian said, you know, we started using the loudspeakers in the mosques, not because it was some Muslim Brotherhood plot, no, because the loudspeakers in the mosques were the best way to get the news into the neighborhood. So someone would take the microphone in the mosque and say, okay, we need 5 guys on the corner of this street and this street. And he said, you know, I'd go down there with my pink broom, because I don't like violence. So he'd go down with his pink broom and he'd defend his neighborhood with his broom.
And that's why it is about people.
Of course.
The technology is just a tool, and that's about the people who don't yield with social apathy. And still there are majority who don't care. Majority of these don't care. They're not only in our region, they are also outside, who don't react to what's going on, who don't read the reports. And that's understandable. You don't have time to read 50 pages report of a human rights watchdog. But maybe you have half an hour a week to watch some videos, to deal with the bloggers who write in your language, specifically for you, to see what's going on down there.
You find ways to communicate.
I think also, all things being equal, I think I agree with you, Mona, that technology is for the good. I read a fascinating article saying when Assad the Older butchered his population, maybe some 20,000 people, not a single picture got out of a body. Today we do see, even among all the censorship and repression in Syria, we do see live pictures from Syria.
Exactly.
And of course you can also say that books can also be used for evil. I mean, you can have propaganda issued by totalitarian states, but we would still, I think, hope all of us would agree that books are for the good. I also think it's much easier for dissidents to, I mean, you only have to click a button if you have an internet connection. You don't have to, like the old Soviet dissidents, you know, write on a toothbrush or something and then have someone smuggle it out in the shoe at great personal risk. So I do think and hope that technology is all things being equal, pro-liberty.
Well, there is the argument that if you have a book, you know, it's actually, you can put it anywhere and you're completely independent. And you have that relationship with the book. You can't communicate with the book, but it's yours. Nobody can turn it off unless they can find it. You know?
Someone can burn
I feel sorry
they can try to burn it,
not
yeah.
being such an optimist as you, because I do believe, history tells me that the only reason for a new weapon to be used is its existence, you know, and this is a weapon. Technology is an accelerator of a tool for empowerment of anything that human beings do, for good and for evil. I don't believe nothing outside ourselves can result or give us liberty. You know, liberty is a tough construction. It's a cultural process.
And habit, you know? Habit of doing it and doing it
and
again.
we must think permanently on that, to use the tools for that, you know, because you can empower the good side.
But we agree. We agree that
never
it's a tool.
believe that a smartphone will save you.
No, nobody said that. That's why I said I would kill anyone who says it's a Twitter revolution.
yes,
It's a tool
yes.
that people
I
have
love
to be
that
out on
when
the
you say it.
streets. So we don't disagree that much.
But as you've seen, we had trouble with this tool here. We had trouble with this one here. I mean, it's quite interesting how little it does work in reality, you know. And we're in the best circumstances with the best people. And at the front row, they're going like this, you know, sort of thing, in the street. And I have a bunch of questions here. I mean, actually, it's interesting because really we've been going over a lot of those questions. But I think it's just worth, you know, so governments are reacting very fast to a lot of the new methods, what seem to be new methods. I mean, what do you think is interesting in a negative way? I mean, interesting about the way dictatorships or elected autocrats are responding to freedom of expression? Is there anything surprising? Is it all what it's always been? Or is there something that has caught you off guard about how governments are responding or reacting?
A particular government or just generally?
In your experience? I mean, I think...
It's nothing I see what is really astonishing. That's clear that there is a model of a consciousness where they see, as we had in the first lecture we had in the morning, then there is a feeling a lot of governments has that they can monopolize this consciousness of people, and by different means. You know, they use media. Oh, new media appeared. We use new media. We use different speakers. But that is all the fight to get into people's mind, to control what people think about, to control how people react, in any type of a control. Whatever it's the parents trying to control the teenager kids, whatever it's the government trying to control all the society, is going to fail. The question is how it's going to fail. What would be the results? Would it be really reforms or just a change of power? But it's anyway not a question that it is bringing new and new ways of controlling. It's not about studying how these ways of controlling are better than ours. They're primitive in any sense because it's about getting into your mind, trying to let society think in a different way. But even in the totalitarian states, even in the Soviet Union, it wasn't possible because there were these brave dissidents, these brave people who have been fighting with the state, and a lot of the people who have been silently supporting them or supporting at home, and Russian kitchens became the main place with Tahrir squares, small squares, but in huge territory of the Soviet Union, where people have been thinking of freedom and they've been dreaming of freedom, and that's what always, in a different means, is a target of control. How people think, how they dream about the future they want to live in.
I think one of the things that worries me most is the tendency of authoritarian states to use human rights to enable and legitimize their repression. I mentioned the Human Rights Council before, where we had since 1999, before that it was in the Human Rights Commission, the whole debate over defamation of religion by the Islamic State. So they recently lost that vote for the first time, but they have then moved their battleground into what I talked about in hate speech. So basically that hate speech should cover...
But that battle's just been lost. I mean, I don't know how many people know this story. Just before you... I know it's like class to raise your hands, but the religious defamation struggle in Geneva, how many of you have followed that? We can hardly see you, but put your hands up. So very few of you is what I'm seeing, unless it's about a quarter of people, which is interesting because it's one of the most important battles for freedom of expression in the last 25 years, and we actually won. I mean,
but
how long we won for, I don't know. But,
I don't think the battle is over. But
no.
we see Syria may become a member of the Human Rights Council. I mean, what kind of world are we living in where we have a Human Rights Council with Libya and with Syria, and Libya was supposed to come on, but got suspended in the last minute because because of everything that went on there. I mean, how could you have a member when NATO was bombing? But you have other states on the council who use human rights to legitimize their repression, and I think that's a big worry, because then human rights lose their meaning. They lose that moral capacity to be the yardstick against which the legitimacy of the state is to be measured.
It's a case of language subversion, no? Calling human rights an institution that puts Syria inside.
It's ridiculous.
So this is to confuse. This is language subversion, just to demoralize.
So just so people who don't know, I mean, there was a big move led to some extent by Pakistan, but by others, to legally formalize at the international level the concept of religious defamation. That, in other words, you couldn't defame religions, i.e., you couldn't criticize them, and this was going to stop people from, in a way, hate speech against religions. You're the lawyer. Am I summarizing it right?
Yes.
And so groups of us all fought it, our different organizations, and abruptly they've dropped it from what they're
All the
after.
worst dictatorships were called a democratic republic of something.
The irony. Well, I think, within that debate, it's really important to understand that, that one of the most ridiculous questions for me since 9/11 has always been, why do they hate us? Assuming that there is this kind of monolithic they out there, Muslims, and the rest of us. And I would always answer that question by saying that I, the Muslim like this, they hate even more than you. So there is no they out there. And I think that goes to the heart of this, especially this religious defamation battle, because it was portrayed by Pakistan, Egypt, and other Muslim majority countries as, we are standing up for Islam, we are fighting for Islam, but it was actually standing up for that dictatorship, and that dictatorship's right to tell Muslims, included and non-Muslims, what their version of Islam is. So there were many in various parts of Muslim majority countries who wanted that religious defamation battle, those countries like Pakistan and Egypt, to be defeated, because it had nothing to do with religion. It had to do with those countries and their ability to dictate the discourse on religion. When you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, where I grew up, and when it comes to censorship especially, it's ridiculous to think that a country like that can continue to, when you enter Saudi Arabia, they open your suitcases and they take away, I once had bought a book, my sister's much younger than me, and this is back in the Spice Girls days. I bought a book on the Spice Girls for my sister, stupidly thinking I could take it into Saudi Arabia because I hid it inside my underwear. And they opened the suitcase, took out the book, and confiscated it. Now, today, you can download that book on a Kindle. you can download that book on your computer screen. So
Yeah.
to think that a regime like the Saudi regime would continue that, but it's all about imposing their own version of religion. It's not about protecting Islam. It's not about, so it goes back to this daddy thing that I was talking about. The state acting like your father, wanting to protect its territory, and that territory, in this case, is your mind and my conscience. And no one should...
As a tool of resistance is phenomenal.
Of course.
Yeah, this is true. The Egyptian case was there was a detail. Mubarak tried to, in many ways, to kill the communications on
He shut down the
the
internet
network.
totally, yes.
But one thing he couldn't done, because killing the internet there, he would have to stop processing the central bank.
Oh,
The central
Egypt
bank,
lost a lot of money during that
because
time.
everything
Was
is
integrated.
online today. So he was obliged to maintain it, and this was the channel where the Google guys made a
Voice to tweet. Well, you
voice
call
to
up...
tweet, and you could still work. So as a tool of resistance for monolithic regimes, no doubt that this technology is capable of creating fissures.
So the machine died, and I'm trying to
So
remember
much
the
for
questions.
technology.
Yes, it's really quite interesting. But I remember a couple of things on it, and one was, what are you got it going? It shows it's my fault. One of the questions was, what are the obligations of Google and Twitter and so on in all of this? I mean, we know there were some initial real problems in China with the corporations basically giving in to the regime, and then some of them withdrew. I mean, how do we, it's one thing to talk about governments, but what about these corporations who in effect have, in a way, a stranglehold on these mechanisms of communication?
Well, one of the many, many catalysts for the Egyptian revolution was a Facebook page called We Are All Khalid Said, which was launched in honor of a young man beaten to death by Egyptian police last year. And its administrators were anonymous. And according to Facebook's terms, you can't launch a Facebook page anonymously. And so someone had to step forward and say, okay, do it in my name. So those are the kind of considerations that I think that these corporations have to take into account. Another one was sites like Flickr and YouTube, user-generated content that, in the case of a very famous blogger in Egypt called Wa'il Abbas, he would upload videos onto YouTube that showed Egyptian police torturing people. And for a while, they shut down his YouTube channel because they said, you're violating our terms because you're posting these very violent videos. And a campaign was launched, and all the explanations and all this, and others, and Flickr with photographs of Egyptian state security officers who were known to have brutalized people, activists, ordinary Egyptians. Their pictures were uploaded onto Flickr and taken down because Flickr said they violate our terms. So these companies have to understand that in certain parts of the world, you can't use them using your name because you're going to endanger your life. And so we have to reach some kind of understanding that both protects, I understand why they say we don't want this incredibly violent content, but also protects the right of people who live in very dangerous dictatorships to upload information that is vital to getting the word out when no one across the world is paying attention.
And we also have examples like that on a video we made about Chechnya, about human rights violations, was blocked on YouTube. I strongly believe that's an issue of international society, of the groups, of people who live here in Norway, in the United States, to address these companies, to tell them about things you've been telling. Many of them also don't launch the special social programs in the countries of human rights violations that needed to be done. But I want to broaden a little bit. It's not only software developers companies or search engine companies, although we have, I know, some from Yahoo here, and there is definitely an issue to debate. That's also about those who conduct hardware. How China and so many other countries actually track the human rights defenders? Who sells the hardware? Who tune, customize this hardware or put software on that base. That's the same Western companies. And that's, I believe it was a number of campaigns in the West. Then the famous coffee production was bought from a dictatorship regime. And people start to campaign because we don't want to support a dictatorship regime drinking a morning coffee. What about these famous, huge hardware companies which are based in Canada, which are based in the United States, which are specifically working for dictatorships in order to let them, they say it differently, security, they say, but in order to let them control what society actually is talking about, in order to invent this new censorship of the new age that is going on not somewhere there, back in those countries, that's happening here. And I strongly believe that's an issue we need to address. That's why we need these active citizens. That's why we need people outside, because that's a small village. That's not it's not a tiny dark corner somewhere in China, or somewhere in Russia, somewhere in the Caucasus.
Yeah,
that's a small place, and it's happening in our countries here in the West as well.
So last minute, anybody?
Yeah, just never forget that the dream of all dictators is to know about you what Google knows already, you know. They began the Berlin Fair last year, that Eric Smith, no? Telling to everybody, I know who you are, I know what you do, I know what hour you do, and I will tell you from now on what you will do next. This was the beginning of his speech, you know, and they really do. This is the point. This is the dangerous point. They really know everything, you know.
Can I say something very quickly?
So,
a lot of people often ask, how can I,
there's two sides.
living in the West, help? And, you know, people in Libya, people in Egypt, people in Syria, in Iran, they don't want you to send money. They want you to pressure not just your governments, but the corporations. It's a huge point. Was it Siemens Ericsson, I think it was, that helps with the mobile phone technology in Iran to track down dissidents in Iran? A German company called Gamma provided all the software that enabled the Egyptian regime and state security specifically to tap into Egyptian email accounts, into basically to track Egyptians. Software companies in the US, as you say, that provide all the software for firewalls, all of that. Pressure those companies, boycott those companies. Tell them we, as concerned citizens in the US, in Canada, in Germany, whoever owns Siemens, Ericsson, whatever the joint company is, tell them that we will not allow you to do this. And we know that you're doing this, because that's how you can truly help people. They don't want your charity. They want you to pressure governments and corporations that are helping dictators over there make their lives hell.
Don't lower your guard. Yes.
No. Thank you very much.